This is the Try Swim Coach podcast, where the most difficult leg of the triathlon becomes your friend, leaving your struggles and your competition behind you. TrySwimCoach.com, helping you to laugh at the water.
Welcome to Try Swim Coach. This is Kevin, and this is episode number 123. And in just a minute, I have an interview coming up with Rob Sleemaker of Vasa, and we tackle a lot of different topics, including how to maximize your swim training when you can't get to the water, and also get into some topics like mindfulness and how to set yourself up for the best possible outcomes. So for me, I have been working on this Primal Health Coaching certification, and that is run by Mark Sisson of Mark's Daily Apple. They are certifying people as health coaches, and I thought it would be really interesting to go through the program and learn as much as I can about coaching and the primal way, because that's something I've really followed for years. And if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you've heard some of the guests that I've had and some of the things I've talked about with low carb, primal, making sure that you're eating less processed foods and more healthy foods, which would be like meats and nuts and vegetables and fruits and stuff like that. So I'm going to have that. I think it takes about 6 months. So I'll be in that program for a while. But if you are interested in that type of thing, let me know, because I'm actually looking to reach out to other health coaches to find out kind of what their experience has been, what they've learned, and how things are going. So there's that. And then I'm also experimenting with my own diet. I heard about this thing called the zero carb diet about a month ago when I was at the Paleo FX conference in Austin, Texas. And I thought it was a really interesting idea, and I became fascinated with it. So it's called the carnivore diet or the zero carb diet, where you're just eating mostly meat and eggs and fish. And so I have been experimenting with going keto. So that means basically you're getting more of your calories from fat, moderate calories from protein, and very few calories from carbs. So I've been doing that for the month of May, and that's going very well. I have good energy. Everything feels good. I just got some blood work done, and everything is checking out. So everything looks really good. And my skin is actually clearing up. I've had some minor skin issues, and that's been clearing up with this keto diet. But I'm actually going to try out this zero carb diet here. Yesterday was my first day, and today is my second day on it. So I will report back to see what happened there. It sounds kind of crazy, but I don't really think it's crazy when you look at the facts backing it. So I'm not sure that I would say it is the ultimate diet. I think there's definitely some room for some carbs, and I don't think zero carb is the only way to go. But I'm going to try this for the next couple weeks and see how I feel, see how it goes, see if I like it. And yeah, we'll check it out. So I'll definitely have some things to say about the zero carb and the keto diet and everything, because I think definitely doing this at least once in a while is a good idea. So that's about it. Here's my interview with Rob Sleemaker. Go out there and have a great week of training, and we'll talk to you soon. All right. Well, I'm really excited to have Rob Sleemaker on the show today. Rob is an exercise physiologist, co-author of Serious Training for Endurance Athletes, and the author of Serious Training for Serious Athletes, and also CEO of Vasa, a designer of premium quality functional sports and fitness exercise equipment at vasatrainer.com. Rob, welcome to Try Swim Coach.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so we've known each other for a while, and we've had some interesting chats back and forth on email. And so that's why, like the last time you emailed me, I think I was like, we should do a show together. I think that would be really helpful and really interesting for us and for the audience.
Great.
Yeah. So why don't we start with a little bit about your background? How did you get involved with swimming and what you're doing now?
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of an interesting twisty-turny story that I'll try to keep as brief as possible. But so I'm going to take it back to when I finished graduate school from University of Arizona in exercise physiology. I moved to Vermont. I'm from New England. I grew up in Maine, but I moved to Vermont for a girl of all things. And then that didn't pay out but she went on and I stayed. And that my first position was in a sports medicine clinic, and I was working with the great fortune of working with these two doctors who were connected in also happened to be connected in with the U.S. biathlon team and the U.S. ski team. And this is back in the early 80s, right around when Nordic ski technique added a new technique, which is now referred to as freestyle skiing, but at the time we called it ski skating. Well, long story short, it kind of tapped in, working with those athletes as an exercise physiologist, tapped into my creativity. And I didn't even know that I was kind of an inventor, innovator at the time. And I created a training device which looks a lot like the Vasa trainer now, except the person was in a standing position, straddling the monorail, and you pull yourself up this. You're standing on this like rolling seat carriage that when you pulled on the straps that were attached to the front of the machine, your whole body would roll up this incline, and then you'd lower back down. So the motion that they used was this double poling, to propel yourself on skis, this double poling motion. And so I actually built a couple for the team and got a lot of responses and decided I would start a company and make these machines, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I had also been working with quite a few elite triathletes, and I realized that the basic device that I had created, instead of standing to do ski poling, if you lay down on a padded bench, you could do a swimming motion, and swimming or like a surf paddling kind of motion. And well, as business goes, inventors don't always imagine where your business is going to go from the rules of business. And so the marketplace dictated that the swim version would be the one that would really help grow the company. The Nordic ski one was okay, but it really wasn't the big market like swimming was. Mm-hmm. So in 1990, I introduced the swim version, what is now the Vasa trainer, to all these high-level swim coaches at the American Swim Coach Conference that was in Pittsburgh. And these three coaches came up, and I didn't know who they were. They just started kind of jumping up and down about the Vasa trainer. They claiming they wish they could have had that thing. They've been looking for something like that for 10 years. And so they all bought some. Mm-hmm. And later on in the day, I looked in the program and I saw their photographs in the program and their bio. And well, it turns out that they were all three of them U.S. Olympic swim coaches.
Nice.
Richard Quick, who is the late Richard Quick, he's now deceased. Richard Schulberg from Germantown Academy, legendary coach. And Nort Thornton, the legendary coach at Cal Berkeley. Those were the three guys who bought them. And the rest is history. The swim coaches found out about them really fast, and news spread quickly, and we just started selling them to swim teams and coaches. And then the swimmers and triathletes kind of found out about them at the same time. Also, right around that same time, I was working with Ray Browning as a pro triathlete, and through him, I met people like Dave Scott and Scott Tinley and, all those guys, and they all got Vasa trainers. In fact, Dave Scott even sort of endorsed the product, and that was really great. So we kind of went off in that direction too. So competitive swimming and triathlon. And then a few years later, the surfers discovered it. And it was an editor from Surfer Magazine. And anyway, the long and the short of the story is that a lot of this stuff happened by accident. My original love and passion is still Nordic skiing. I love the sport of swimming and triathlon too, but I'm still rooted in Nordic skiing. And all of this brought forth something I didn't even know existed in me, which was an interest in innovating products and seeing a problem and then wanting to use, my ideas and in this case, an actual physical product, a machine to solve those problems. And it's just what I love to do. If you come to me with a problem, no matter what it is, my mind's going to start going on, how can I help this person solve that problem? And I might not be able to help you, but it's what I do.
Yeah. So can you talk about a little bit about, because I grew up in the 80s and using a lot of swim benches. Like that was part of in the summer, we would do all this dryland training, and some of it was weights and some of it was running and some of it was getting on the swim bench. So can you talk about the difference between the Vasa trainer and what I was doing back in like 1986 or whatever?
Right. Well, yeah, because the Vasa trainer really didn't come into play until, at least into swimming, until 1990. So you were probably using either what was called a biokinetic swim bench or Doc Councilman, the famous coach from Indiana, invented the isokinetic swim bench. Both of those machines, you laid on a bench that didn't move and you pulled on swim paddles that were connected to cords. And when you pulled those cords, it made a resistance device engage and turn, and you could vary the resistance. They were kind of rough in the sense that, when you pulled on them, they were friction devices. So, you felt the friction. It's way different than like the Vasa ergometer, swim ergometer now, which uses a fan wheel, air resistance, like rowing machines, like the Concept 2 rowing machine. So I would say the concept is very similar in terms of being able to do some swim specific strength, power, and endurance training. So those benches you used had a lot of value and a lot of function. And the coach could, so from a technique point of view, a coach could stand right next to the athlete and make small corrections and then tell them to go into the pool. If they had an injured athlete, like an ear infection or a lower leg injury, the athlete could stay involved with practice and not lose fitness. And from a conditioning point of view, you could use the swim benches to do specific strength and power and endurance training. It just mattered how much resistance you used and what you were trying to accomplish. But so then fast forward to the Vasa trainer works differently. We do have an ergometer, which works a lot more like those old swim benches that you're talking about. But the trainer is different, where you lay on a padded bench that is on a rolling carriage that rolls up a monorail. So when you pull on the cords, the pulley cords, or we have another set of webbing straps that makes it more difficult. But you pull on those, your whole body goes up the incline. So Richard Quick is the one who really taught me this concept, which he claimed at the time that many coaches wanted to be able to teach an athlete to, when they swim, to enter the water and ideally get such a good grip on the water with their catch that they pulled their body past that point. So in other words, when a swimmer, gets into that good high elbow catch position, their hand relative to the side of the pool is at a certain place. And ideally, their hand and forearm, I call it the blade, stays right there relative to the side of the pool, and your body just moves past it. Well, the Vasa trainer works like that, because when you pull on the paddles, your hand and arm are kind of fixed relative to the monorail, and then your whole body on the rolling sea carriage moves past it. So it's really useful for ingraining that notion, that idea of getting a really good grip on the water and pulling your body past it. And then other coaches over the years have innovated some accessories that make that even better. Like Matt Kretich from University of Tennessee came up with these things we call forearm cuffs. So instead of putting your hand in our normal handles or paddles that are attached to the cords, you put it's sort of like a wide ankle strap that you put on your forearm, and you connect that to the cords, get into that high elbow catch position, and then pull your body past your hand. What that does is it not only teaches you not to drop your elbow at the catch, but it also teaches the swimmer where they ought to be feeling the water when they pull through the water. And so for swimmers who do things like you've probably heard this expression, like a princess wave, with their wrist is just kind of like, all loosey-goosey and going side to side, or maybe they're crossing midline, crossing over the midline of their body, or their catch is too wide or too narrow, or they're dropping their elbow. The forearm cuff won't allow any of that to happen, because if you do any of those things, it'll just slip right off your forearm. But if you're in the right position, you'll be able to pull your body past your hands. Your arms will be in exactly the right position. And then the idea is to take that neuromuscular training over to the water and replicate that in the water. So anyway, that's a little bit of the story behind the swim benches. And then, as you know, we innovated the newer version of the swim bench like you described, and that's the ergometer. And when someone it's a very similar setup. You lay on a padded bench that's on a monorail. The whole seat, carriage, and bench rolls up if you want it to. But when you pull on the drive cords of the ergometer, it makes a fan wheel go around. So it's not exactly like pulling your body past a fixed hand, that your hand and arm come toward your body, but your body also rolls up the rail. So it's kind of this interesting floating feeling that you get when you're on the erg. But probably the most powerful thing about the ergometer, besides that it sets you up anatomically to do the correct stroke, is that it has sophisticated electronics. So you can measure your power output in watts for your left arm and your right arm. You can look at your power balance. You can do, all the things I mentioned earlier about using it for teaching technique, about using it for injury rehab, using it for performance testing, or even just getting it done workouts when you can't get to the pool. It's not just for swim teams. It's, anybody can use it. Master swimmers, triathletes, surfers even, and they use them at health clubs too. So it's really, think of it like a rowing machine for swimming with very accurate, precise power metrics that allow you to do repeatable workouts and see your progress differently than always just swimming in the water.
Right. Yeah. And that's one thing I love about it, because there's times during the year that a lot of people just, for whatever reason, they don't have access to pools and things like that. Now, what would you say about just in general, or how much should people be using like a Vasa or Vasa Erg versus swimming? Like, can they cut down on their actual pool time using the Vasa, or is it something that just is in addition to swim training?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I would say that it's all of the above. It really depends on the individual. It depends a little bit on their experience with swimming technique. It depends on their life situation and how much time they have available to get to a pool or the open water. So we have athletes that report being an adult learned swimmer. So they don't have the greatest, most efficient technique like someone who grew up on a swim team and, really nailed down their technique. But they, I'm thinking of one in particular who he just won his age group at Ironman Texas, and he started swimming at age 27. And I think he's in, mid 30s or something now. I can't remember his age, but he does almost all of his swim specific training on his Vasa swim erg, and he goes to the pool, maybe a few times during the year, and then maybe for the couple of weeks before a big race, he'll get back in the water more frequently. So you get people on that extreme all the way over to people who they don't have any problem getting to a pool. Logistically, it's easy for them. They can do it. And, they just prefer to be able to do a controlled workout on the erg, because the one thing that's really different about the erg than swimming in the water is that it's really all about pulling. So imagine swimming in the open water with a pull buoy, and even more with a front mount snorkel, because you don't really have to turn your head to breathe when you're on the ergometer. And it's really about just dialing in that really powerful, efficient pull part of your stroke, everything that happens under the water, not just the recovery of over the water. And there's something special about that because it's highly concentrated effort. I mean, for example, for 100 meters on the erg, and the time it takes someone to do 100 meters on the Vasa swim erg, or the time to do it on the swim erg, would be comparable to what they would do in the water using a pull buoy in open water. No turns and starts in the pool, just straight out swimming. So if that gives you a sense of what it's like, it's just pulling with very concentrated effort. You can see what you're doing. You can see if you're making a mistake with your dropped elbows or crossing midline, because of the monorail's right there, it's almost like a template, for your technique. And you can also see if your power's dropping off. I think one of the things that's very difficult to see in the water, when someone reaches a fatigued state, it's unless they're a really efficient, accomplished swimmer, typically what happens is their technique falls apart and they get very inefficient when fatigue sets in. But in the water, it's hard to see it. I mean, unless you're a skilled coach and you're watching someone, from the deck, it's not always easy to see how their stroke might be shortening, or, how they might be stronger on one side than they're on the other. So they're kind of always bumping into the left lane line, or, the things that happen. And that's one of the great things about the ergs that, are training on land at home. It's time efficient. You can see things you can't see in the water. You can measure your results pretty well and go for repeatable. It's not to say that someone should always swim on land on an erg. What I would say is the only time to do that is if you absolutely can't get to the pool a couple of times a week. I think a nice balance for triathletes would be if they want to save a bunch of time and they want to have a, sort of a metrics driven workout, maybe use a swimmer a couple of times, 2 or 3 times a week, and go to the pool twice a week if they can, or the open water.
Yeah.
But focus on, what can they learn on land that they can transfer to the water and vice versa. It's like, because they really need to be integrated in order to get the most out of that kind of training.
Yeah, that's awesome that I didn't know that people were doing, like some people were actually doing the majority of their training with a Vasa and like actually only swimming, like you said, a few times a year.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, there was a really interesting article that just came out on slowtwitch.com. It was an interview with this guy, Sam Gaudet from Belgium, he's the athlete I was talking about, who trains almost exclusively for swimming on his Vasa swimmer. And he loves it. And it's training indoors on anything, whether it's a bike or treadmill or a Vasa swimmer. You've got to have some strategies to make sure that you're staying focused and getting the most out of it. But they're very time efficient workouts. You can get a lot of work done in 15 or 20 minutes versus, say, how long does it take you to drive to the pool, change, get in, do your swim workout, and hopefully your swim workout's a quality one. Get out, change, drive back to wherever you're going. In 15 or 20 minutes in your home gym, you can crank out an incredible swim workout.
Yeah, that's what I love about it. It's just so efficient with triathletes. It's especially important to save on time when your training's got so many things going on. So yeah, that's awesome. Now I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the more, I would say, philosophical parts of training itself. And because I think my emails that go out, people that are subscribed to my newsletter, I send out a lot of emails about the philosophy and the mindset of training and some of the psychology behind it, as opposed to the technical aspects of freestyle. We have a few coaches with Try Swim Coach, and we all have our specialties. And so we do have the technical tips and things like that, but I like to get into the deeper stuff. So one of the things that came up was I had an email that went out about kind of staying in the moment and only thinking about controlling what you can control as opposed to the things that are outside of your sphere of influence in terms of your swim. And you brought up something, you responded to that and brought up this Jack Canfield E+R+O. And I thought that was interesting. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and what you were saying there.
Sure. Yeah, Kevin, let me just say, I've really appreciated the psychological and the mental aspect of what you have contributed with your articles and posts. And that's what prompted that response. Yeah. So I think it's great. I personally believe that human beings are mind, body, and spirit. And when we separate them and don't integrate those 3 elements, I think we're missing something. And so that's why I appreciate that your approach with Try Swim Coach is to integrate all 3. It's great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I learned this thing from Jack Canfield, and I don't know, he's the author of Chicken Soup for the Soul and many other books. He's an incredible leader and speaker, et cetera. And I've learned a lot from listening to his audio CDs as well as reading his books and over the years. We're talking like for the last 30 plus years I've been learning from him. But this E+R=O, it's a formula which E stands for event, R stands for response, and O is the outcome of that formula, E+R. So an event happens in our lives. It happens every day. Some event happens. Maybe your spouse leaves the cap off the toothpaste, right? And you walk into the bathroom and, oh, dang, there's that cap off again for the 9,000th time. So the thing that I love about this formula, and it really feeds back into mindfulness, is that if people will accept and be aware that we only have control over our response to any event. So I don't have any control over my wife leaving the cap off the toothpaste. I could bitch and moan about it all day long. I could be vindictive and get her back with something else or whatever it is. All of those things are my responses. I have control over those responses. What I think people don't always stay mindful of is that it is our responsibility and our choice to respond a certain way. And it influences the outcome dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in the grocery store, I could be in a hurry to get through the grocery store line or whatever, and some guy cuts in front of me because he's only got one or two items or whatever. I could sit there and stew, or I could get angry, or I could chew him out and say, hey, you cut in line, get behind me, or whatever it is. Or I could just be chill and just say, think to myself, well, this fella must really have a need greater than mine. He's got to get out of here. So that's fine. Go ahead and just stay relaxed about it. And, then it turns out that 5 minutes later, when you're wheeling your cart out into the parking lot and you look at your car and you got a flat tire, and then you realize that guy that jumped ahead of you in line is in the car next to you. And he says, wow, that's too bad you got a flat tire. Let me help you fix that. Huh. You see what I mean? Like, our response to something can really influence the outcome. And, I'm not perfect by any means. And, just talk to my kids. They'll tell you that I overreact all the time. And I'm working on, really trying to be mindful to understand the power of my response, especially with my own children or those close to me, because it influences the outcome. So, if I want to have a more loving, closer relationship with my kids, then I darn well better get a hold of how I'm responding to them, because I'm either going to push them away or I'm going to bring them closer. So the choice is mine.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you could so relate this to doing a race like a triathlon, like you were mentioning, that getting cut off in line. And, I was picturing like being in an open water swim, and how many times do you get cut off or hit even? And it's like, those are things that are part of this sport that if you can accept that and realize what your response is, it helps so much with your overall outcome. And then the same thing with like a flat tire on your bike, like that could just destroy you mentally, or you just roll with it and see, kind of see if you can stay mindful and stay present and, okay, this is what's happening, instead of kind of denying what is actually happening around you.
Right. Those are great examples. In fact, I'll tell you a little story. Back in the day when I was coaching Ray Browning, we were invited to do a clinic in Mexico, right? And so we're out for this big group ride with the athletes in the camp, and Ray flatted, and his back tire flatted. Back tire, keep in mind, okay? With the cluster and everything. And because he was a professional triathlete, but also because he was Ray Browning, his attitude and everything, he was off his bike, had the wheel off, had the tire off, and then the new tire, the new tube or whatever it was, back on. Literally, he had that thing changed in about 40 seconds. I've never seen anybody do it faster. Wow. It was unbelievable. Like, the rest of the group had barely even caught up to us. Yeah. And he had it all changed. And what impressed me the most about it was, besides his skill in doing it so quickly, was his attitude. It was his response to the event. It was just unbelievable. And he was like, he's like that in general in life, but he was like that when it came to training. He was truly professional about it. He wasn't going to let it rile him. He wasn't going to waste any energy, pissing and moaning about it. He was just going to get it done. And I think that points to, sort of a pervasive aspect of being a human being, but especially in our society in America, or maybe the Western society. And that is, people take things so personally all the time. Mm-hmm. And there's a wonderful book, you're probably aware of it, called The 4 Agreements. Yep. And I love that book. And one of the 4 agreements is don't take things personally. And I think it ties into this formula of E plus R equals O. So often a person's response to an event is rooted in them taking that event personally. Somebody looks at them cross-eyed and they think like, what the heck is that person looking at me cross-eyed, when maybe the person's cross-eyed, yeah. So I think that's a really great reference for people if they're interested to learn more about this, is read The Four Agreements. It's a great book.
Yeah, that was a good one. I got a lot out of that book. I remember reading it like 4 or 5 years ago. And yeah, some of the stuff, it relates to, I have several notes here. We could get into all sorts of topics, but this kind of relates to one of the things that I had written down, and that's the idea of autonomy in training. So giving yourself choices versus beating yourself up. And I think that's something that I emphasize a lot when I write to the list, to the audience here. And I wanted to get your perspective on this because I think you were very much in line with this idea that, people kind of tend to be too hard on themselves, and that it kind of seems like you're kind of being an inner coach, but you're actually just beating yourself up and you're beating yourself down, and it's not helping you to progress. Instead, it's in the long run, it's detrimental to your success because you're sort of like being the authoritative parent to yourself, right?
Yeah. Again, I think this comes back to self-awareness and understanding that you alone have the responsibility and the choice to respond any way you want. Mm-hmm. So, I think it comes down to asking oneself, well, does beating myself up, verbally with my inner dialogue, or physically by, making choices, unhealthy food choices or unhealthy lifestyle choices or whatever it is, nobody's making you do that. It's your choice. And I think so often people don't assume that responsibility for their choices. I think it's very much a human condition. It's not like anybody listening to this, don't take what I'm saying personally, because I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else. And I have plenty of days when my inner voice is beating myself up for not being this or not doing that, or, responding to my 16-year-old daughter a certain way, or, whatever it is. We're all in this together. And, you mentioned about something about mindfulness before. Again, I think this, as we raise our self-awareness and our mindfulness, we can catch that inner voice, maybe saying something that isn't really useful, or it's not going to be productive in the long run. It's only going to, drain our energy, or maybe it's going to have a ripple effect. Sometimes I find myself, if I'm beating myself up over, feeling like I'm not a good leader or not a very effective CEO or whatever it is at work, if I really do a number on myself with my inner dialogue, and then I go home and a few other little events happen with family members or whatever, it can end up being a not so nice outcome and a not a good feeling. So that's why it's so important to really understand we have that choice. And the more, just like doing weight training or improving in your swimming or whatever it is, the more we practice that mindfulness and that autonomy in our lives, in our training, et cetera, the better we get at it. The quicker you'll catch yourself beating yourself up, and you'll say, okay, we don't need that today. Let's just put that away and come back to the moment.
Right. Yeah. When you were talking, I was thinking about some things that kind of relate to this, that in my past, when I was in my last year of high school, I decided to join this swim team that had this coach that was just like kind of like a dictator. He was a very negative guy, and his way was the right way. And he would yell at people, and he even said, I will never give anybody positive feedback. He only gave negative feedback. But at the time, I didn't know. I mean, he had coached Olympians and all this stuff. So I thought, well, this is the guy. This is what I need. I need to have this drill sergeant just telling me, beating me up every day, and then I'll get faster. And the end of the year, I just felt kind of beat up. Like I just didn't really I felt like I could have done just as well or better had I gone with something a little more loose, I guess. And then when I was in college, so just fast forwarding to my last year of college, ended up with this coach that he really didn't have a lot of experience coaching. And he was definitely not a cheerleader type. He was definitely not a drill sergeant type. He just sort of gave the workouts based on all his research and studying, and would sit back and kind of let you do your thing in the workout. And that worked so well for me because it was all about self-motivation and the internal motivation versus having somebody yelling at me all the time. And I just looked at that as like, wow, this is huge. I had like my best season that year with having very little of discipline or any of that. So yeah, that's something that I think is important to keep in mind for most people that are going into triathlon or doing triathlons, that you can kind of go easy on yourself and actually do better and have more success and, of course, more fulfillment out of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, this is timely because I just read a quote by a very well-known swim coach named Don Swartz. And it was from the Ask American Swim Coaches. They send out a thought of the day every week. And it reads like this: failure fixed by others leaves you weakened. Mistakes you overcome empower you. And I think one of the things that relates back to what you said about that first coach you had is that it's likely by being such a dictator type coach that he was maybe always trying to fix whatever was wrong with the athletes or whatever they were failing at. But that doesn't really empower the athlete to fix it themselves. Right. It's sort of like my way or the highway. Okay, well, then everybody does your way. But are they really getting that deeply ingrained in themselves because they're overcoming it themselves? I don't know. It's philosophically, I just think it's so much better when people take responsibility for their mistakes and for learning and, overcoming emotional barriers as well as the physical barriers and stuff like that. And, you hear about helicopter parents and stuff like that doing too much for their kids. It's the same thing. Yep. How are your kids ever going to learn to overcome failures and mistakes and grow stronger from it if we're always out there fixing it for them or doing it for them?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that goes to the idea of building your confidence through your actions. And that's one thing that's really nice about triathlon and swimming is that you can work towards a goal and complete that. And you sort of gain confidence based on all of these mistakes that you might make along the way or the struggles you have with training and, putting it together with all the different resources out there. It's kind of like something that you can really feel good about, afterwards.
Absolutely. Well, do you know Chris Dobrzelski, of Monumental Results there in San Diego?
No.
Oh, he's a guy that I recommend that you might get to know him, but he wrote a book called Going the Distance. Anyway, one of the things he says, which I think relates to this notion of building confidence through action, I'm just quoting him here. He wrote, small, consistent change over a significant period of time leads to monumental results. Mm-hmm. So, that goes back to like, if you take action, even if it's just small actions that are helping you move toward your big goal or your small goal or whatever it is, you'll gain confidence. And there's no question that happens. And it's funny because one of the things that I think has happened as a result of inventing the Vasa trainer and the Vasa ergometer, one of the wonderful things for me to witness happening is that for those people, especially those people who are time crunched and they need some kind of a solution so they can maintain consistent training. So I'm going to say like an example as an adult learned swimmer who's doing triathlons, right? And the open water swim in a triathlon can be daunting for those people and for anybody really, but especially for someone who's not experienced. And so if you think of it like building blocks of, building your confidence through building blocks, well, you've got to take action. So if your training plan says you need to swim 4 or 5 times a week, but logistics and life and everything is getting in the way and you're only making it to the pool twice a week, that's fine. But what are you doing for the other 2 or 3 workouts you were supposed to do? Mm-hmm. And if you're not doing anything that is going to advance you toward being prepared come race day, then you're not going to be building confidence. Mm-hmm. And if you toe the line on race day and you're really not prepared physically or mentally, then you're going to get out into that combat swim and chances are that something's going to happen. Some event is going to happen, right? You're either going to get, elbowed or pushed under, or you're going to swallow some water or, whatever it is. So if you go into that race with confidence because you've prepared and both mentally and physically, then your response to whatever that event is going to really influence the outcome. Mm-hmm. And if you've got confidence, your response is going to be way better than if you go in unprepared. So again, working backwards from what is your goal? Okay, I want to do a triathlon. All right, how many times a week do I swim? 4 to 5. Can I realistically get that done? No, I can only get to the pool once or twice. Okay, what am I going to do to show up prepared for that race? And I don't care whether someone buys a Vasa or if they buy some stretch cord tubing or if they figure out a way to, get their fitness in somehow using some machines at the health club or whatever it is. But do something, take that action because it's going to move you toward your goal with confidence, and you're going to be able to accomplish your goal with confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so we're offering today, because I really believe in Vasa and what Rob and his team are doing and the equipment. I want to offer a discount for anybody that's interested in ordering any of the equipment. So if you want to order a Vasa or Vasa Erg, you can go to the site. It's vasatrainer.com and just use the discount code. There'll be a discount code in there, bonus-try swim, bonus-try swim. And it can be, it doesn't have to be all caps. It can be anything. That'll give you 5% off your order. So that'll be good for until the end of June. So we'll make that available. The podcast should come out before June 1st. So the end of June, you can get 10% off of Vasa. And so just want to throw that out there. But anyway, Rob, did you have anything else to add before we wrap it up here?
No, thanks so much, Kevin. It's a pleasure to speak with you. And I guess the only thing I would say again is, like all of us, we put our pants on one leg at a time. And, I think just embrace our humanity, keep moving forward, taking action. That's what's going to get it done. It's going to build confidence, and, watch out for that, those little gremlins in our mind that like to, give negative self-talk. It's always going to be there, probably will never go away, but being mindful of it is what helps to influence our response to different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really enjoyed our conversation and all the things that you're contributing. And so I wish you the best. And thanks again for coming on.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. And I wish you the best too.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Thanks for listening to another episode covering swimming and triathlon mastery. To get your free online swim clinic, just go to tryswimlessons.com. Give us your name and email, and we'll have session number 1 off to you right away. Begin your process of befriending the swim and laughing at the water now.